As we do on a Monday, we check in with the Australian Christian Lobby, and Christopher Brohier is the Australian Christian Lobby State Director for South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania. Christopher, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil, and g'day, listeners. It's actually South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory. I haven't got the Victorian gig.
Okay. All right, I'll make an adjustment there. Hey, Christopher, just before we talk about some really big, important issues, just to mention Pastor Andrew Evans. He was a South Australian boy in the sense of the formation of a fabulous church there, and, of course, the co-founder of the Family First Party. Did you have any special reflection on him?
Yeah, so I remember Andrew saying that they had a AECC, that it was then called Assemblies of God Conference, and I think it was Philip White, one of Australia's leading atheists, spoke, and he said to them, if your mob got yourself organised, you could beat my mob. And that led to Andrew and others forming the Family First Party, started in South Australia. There was a couple of senators elected to the federal parliament as well. I remember him saying he'd walk past Parliament House and pray and say, Lord, if you have a seat there for me, keep it. And that's a great encouragement of faith, of starting something which was brand new in an Australian political context. And that name, Family First, particularly in South Australia, still retains its a very well-liked and well-known brand, and it's been now rejigged by some others, and we'll be contesting, I think, the next federal election and certainly the next state election here and in other places. So there's an enduring legacy in our patch, in the political sort of sphere, for Andrew's faith and grace and foresight.
Wonderful. And, if our mob could get their act together, that would be pretty significant. And, hey, I know you're playing your role in getting the mob around all sorts of issues. Hey, thanks for that reflection, Christopher. Let's get into some of the issues. An abortion inquiry, the Senate inquiry titled Access to Reproductive Health, was released last week. What's your reflection on what's happening?
So I think three main points, Neil. The first is the committee, in a very flawed process, disregarded the majority of submissions that were put in. So we know that about 1,600 submissions, individual detailed submissions, not pro forma letters or anything like that, were put in. And they classed all of those as really part of one campaign, and so they put a few examples, and that masked the fact that the majority of Australians who contributed to this inquiry didn't want a further proliferation of abortion. But the committee tried to hide that, and that, in our view, is disrespectful for a Senate committee to call for public submissions. People take time. I've read some of these submissions, like some of them were 2 pages, that people had put in work, and just to have them lumped is, in our view, disrespectful.
Just to pause and reflect on that for a moment, Christopher, because perhaps this is happening more and more, because there is an outcry that's coming from a conservative Christian constituency, and what you're saying here is, and perhaps this is, you might be seeing something that's been leading up to this, but when you get all of those who are against lumped into one bunch and set aside so that they can look at the detail of what's happened in the other submissions. Is that the sort of way it seems to look?
Yep, exactly. And some of the submissions they have published had organisations with certain names, but who knows what they are? They could just be names. And so there clearly was a bias in the approach of the committee. That's number one. But number two, I also just want to pick up the thought of conservative Christians. In this context, we're not conservative anymore. We're the radicals. We're the ones who want to stand for life and truth, where the often many people just want to leave things alone and be apathetic. But this is radical gospel living, calling for the value of every human life.
Well, interesting, isn't it, the way Christians are being seen? And you make a very strong point. We're no longer just those conservatives. We're the radicals because we're having an expectation that life will be preserved. So far as the numbers go, there's some evidence in this inquiry that something like 88,000 abortions are happening in Australia annually. Any thoughts around those numbers? Because sometimes they're considered to be not always all that accurate.
Yeah, so that's a very important truth that comes out of this inquiry, because in the majority of states, we don't keep proper stats about abortions. The only state that keeps proper stats is South Australia. And so a lot of the working out of the amount of abortions that are done in Australia have worked from extrapolating from the South Australian figures. But this inquiry puts it out there that there are about 88,000 in Australia annually. So I'd just like us to pause and reflect on that. That is 1,800 this week. 1,800 children, unborn children, are going to have their lives ended. 1,800 mums are going to be carrying that memory in themselves, physically and emotionally, for the rest of their lives. 1,800 potential fathers will have that in their minds. You can't get away from it. I just want to tell you this little story about, we were having some renos done at our house, and we engaged an architect. He did the work, great. I met him a little while later at the local footy oval, and we were just chatting, and he said to me, we had to do it, you know. I said, what? He said, we were going to have twins, but we couldn't handle it, so we had to abort. And that, I've never forgotten that, Neil, because this was a man who I only knew briefly.
Yep.
And totally unprompted, he said that was on his mind. It was on his heart. And so 1,800 children, 1,800 mums and potential fathers are going to carry that. That is a shame. That is a tragedy for Australia.
And Christopher, some of the other things that are coming out of some of these submissions, the illusion that it's an easy and a safe thing to have an abortion. Actually, abortions are difficult and require, significant supervision by doctors. Any thoughts around the perception in the community about abortion being an easy process, when in actual fact this is very confronting for any woman to undergo?
Yes, so if you read the MSI international website, they're the ones who sell the abortion pills and gain massive income from it. It said that medical abortions is a simple, easy process, etc. That's the flavor you get. But this inquiry says that it's a painful and confronting process. That's especially at home, because a young woman is going to see the body of the infant in some shape or form. That's a tough gig. But also, there was a complaint made that lots of doctors weren't getting involved in the prescription of these drugs. But the evidence was that it takes a lot of time and follow-up and care. And some of the doctors just don't have time to do it. And that's very significant, particularly in Queensland, because there's a push now to have tele-abortions in Queensland. So you consult a doctor on the phone, perhaps, and you're sent the pills. That lies exactly contrary to this evidence that a medical abortion has got to be carefully supervised, and it's not a simple process. It's a complicated process because you're poisoning the little growing fetus in the woman's womb. This is complicated and tough stuff.
It is.
And this inquiry brings it out.
Christopher, in the Australian Christian Lobby submission, what were the key points that you were recommending to this committee?
I think what we were saying was that there's already abortion to birth across the country. We should be providing pregnancy care for mums who want to continue with their babies, because there's evidence that some women, a significant number perhaps, choose an abortion because they think they don't have the wherewithal to see the pregnancy through to birth. That should never happen in a country like Australia. We should be providing pregnancy care and information how you can obtain pregnancy care to women who can then make an actual free choice to decide to have their baby or not, and hopefully to have their baby. As an example, Neil, if you Google unplanned pregnancy, you will get, in a South Australian context, which I'm familiar with, you will get reference to the Pregnancy Help Centre, which provides only information about abortions. Why should we not have similar information given to mums to say, okay, that's one aspect. Here's another aspect. We, the community, will support you in pregnancy care. We will do that. We will give you counselling. We will give you support. We will give you access to those who will provide baby clothes, etc., etc. Why should we not do that? Why should we not at least promote those pregnancy help centres, which are doing that completely voluntarily now? It is an unbalanced view, and it is a push by government to promote abortion, and that should never be the case.
That's tragic, and it's challenging for anyone who recognises the imbalance that is there. But that imbalance is moving into all sorts of new territory. Let me just ask you if there's updates and things that are happening in the ACT, because the ACT government is mandatorily acquiring Canberra's Calvary Hospital, and this is a hospital that has Christian foundations and is pro-life, and the government is stepping in to take it over. What are your thoughts here?
So this is a very concerning story, Neil, as you would know. So about 20 years ago, the ACT government asked the Little Sisters of Mary to take over and run one of Canberra's public hospitals, and they've done that. They've done that well. It's got about 76 years to go on the lease. About a month ago, there was a report released in the ACT Parliament that said something to the effect that the ethos of the Calvary Hospital was problematic because they weren't providing abortion services, and if voluntary assisted dying comes in, they won't do that either. That seems to me to be the underlying genesis for this amazing push to compulsory takeover and walk into the hospital on the 3rd of July. So they introduced the legislation a couple of weeks ago, and they're going to vote on it on the 31st of May. They've put aside all the committee stages, said they're not going to do that. They've changed the rules, and they will go in and march in and take over, just like in the Anschluss in Austria in 1930s. They're just going to come in and take over the hospital. And they have to provide proper compensation, just compensation. That's in the ACT Self-Government Act. But that's going to be worked out afterward. And here's one of the interesting things. The Act says that the method of compensating, of assessing compensation will be provided by regulation. So the takeover bill says we're going to take over and we're going to tell you how we work out just compensation. That that's making the ACT government, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Shouldn't happen. Should not happen. This is the best operating hospital in Canberra. The other public hospital, the Canberra Public Hospital, is in a mess, and the government that made a mess wants to take over the hospital that's running well. What are they going to do with it?
Christopher, you're a man with a legal background. What sort of precedent does it create when a government can do that, take over a Catholic-owned hospital, and I think you said something like 76 years still to go on their lease, very heavy-handed. What sort of precedent does that create?
Well, it's a very concerning precedent, Neil, but if you think about it, say the government thinks, look, we don't like what's being taught in Christian schools in, say, Victoria. They're teaching that we should have a sexually restrained life. We should only have kids should remain pure and only have sexual relations in marriage. We don't like that. That's against our philosophy. They could take over. They could pass a special act and take over. Or, say, a government that doesn't like horse racing. They could take over the local racing club. It is totalitarianism at its core. That's the philosophy of this. And it is wrong, and we must do everything we can to oppose it.
And happening today in the ACT, there's been a protest or two. You've had ACL supporters at a community gathering last Monday and then on Wednesday. How have they looked?
Well, we had about, in a couple of days last week, we announced a meeting and we had getting close to 200 people, I think, very concerned. There was a rally outside Parliament Legislative Council and quite a number of people attended. There's a big petition being put out by the Catholic Church. We're running a campaign on acl.org.au, which you can go and sign and send letters to the Prime Minister and the ACT parliamentarians and the Senator for Canberra for the ACT, Kerry Gallagher. So we're doing all of that. Get on board, because this is not just an ACT issue. This is a national issue. It could be any of us. It could be any of us or any of our institutions.
Okay, so there's a campaign underway, and I'll point listeners to acl.org.au to participate in that. And it's not just for listeners in and around the ACT, it's for every listener right around Australia. Some action you can take today. So the ACL website, acl.org.au. Hey, time is running out. Something big on the horizon. That's ACL's new CEO, who starts tomorrow. You'll be looking forward to having Michelle Pearce take over the reins. Yes,
so that'll be the start of a new season. It's been, as everyone would know, it's been a tough time for the last few months, but Michelle starts officially tomorrow, and many of the staff are gathering in Canberra to sort of have a download of what's happening across the country. So please be in prayer for her. And we have, if I could say, we have our end of financial year appeal going at acl.org.au. So if God moves your heart as a listener, please jump on and support us, because there's a massive amount of work going around the country, and as Vision does, we need your support.
Let me point listeners to acl.org.au. Christopher Brohier, who is the State Director for the ACL in South Australia, the Northern Territory and Tasmania. Christopher, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil.